Thank you, Jeremy. I'm John Wendell from Georgia Tech Research Institute, and I went to graduate school here at Georgia Tech. And at Georgia Tech, we tend to study and analyze everything. And one of my mentors way back at Georgia Tech in the early days there said, John, when you go out in the wild, you got to remember one thing. You've got to always know your speaker. And he says, I've done a lot of analysis and research on speakers. He says, if your speaker is wearing an open collar, he's talking about his work. If a speaker comes and he's wearing a tie, he's talking about someone else's work. And if he's wearing a full-blown suit, he's lying. Now, that doesn't apply to our sponsors, and if you're in DC, so there's some exceptions that are out there. But it's kind of a good rule of thumb. Our pilot is called Scaling Interoperable Trust through a Trust Marketplace. So those of you who are wearing ties, you may want to start taking those ties off. And see, that's one good thing about the IDESG. There's not a lot of ties in there. There's a lot of people rolling up their sleeves, actually going and doing some work, and that's one of the reasons we got involved here. So just I want to introduce our team before we start out here. We've got a number of researchers from the Georgia Tech Research Institute. Some of them are in the room here. If you could just stand up for a second so they can point you out and ask you hard questions later on. There's 4 or 5 of them here. Also a number of faculty members on the Georgia Tech faculty. We've got some primarily from our privacy team, Dr. Doug Blau, Dr. Peter Swire, and Dr. Andy Anton, which are pretty well known in the privacy community. They're also members of our privacy team here. Also partnering with the National Association of State Chief Information Sharing Officers. We've got Chad Grant in the room as well, representing them. And then a number of members in the law enforcement community from the National Identity Exchange Federation. I'll introduce those in a minute. So in the beginning, we had our identities, what I call locked up into application-specific silos. We would build our applications, and then as an afterthought, we would go and find ways to connect people into those applications, provision those, credential those users, identity proof. It's kind of an afterthought. And those identities worked with a single application locked in a silo. Then along comes federated identity. And now we can separate the identity proofing, the identity provisioning function from the actual service providers and the application providers. We also emerged this concept of attribute providers. But now that these are functions are provided by different agencies, different organizations, we really need to think a lot about trust and interoperability and privacy and liability, things that we hadn't thought that much about before. New set of problems. So what emerged, this concept of trust frameworks. And it's not really new. We always had communities of interest, and we had federations and information sharing environments, and they provided that context, that set of common operational rules that we could all operate with to provide that trust across federations. So as we start to take a look at the landscape today, there's lots of trust frameworks out there. They're all a little bit different. There's lots of layers of agreements that have to happen to be a member of those trust frameworks. A lot of them are what we call opaque and monolithic. You're either a member of the club or you're not a member of the club. So to compare the differences between these trust frameworks or information sharing environments is often a pretty heavy lift, and there's been a lot of initiatives lately to take a look at those and to do that comparison. When you think about cross-framework trust, how do we get that? And that's a big problem. That's a problem, an identity ecosystem size problem. We have a user in one federation or one information sharing environment that wants to get access to a relying party in another. How do we do that? There's lots of ways today to do it, but not very many of them are very scalable, and they don't extend out very, very well. So for example, you could say, I have a user in one ecosystem that wants to get access to a relying party in another trust framework. Well, I can get multiple identities, one from each. Or my identity provider can join multiple trust frameworks. Well, that's a problem too. There's a heavy lift, there's onboarding. My relying party could maybe join multiple trust frameworks. Again, maybe a heavy lift right there. What about interfederation trust? Well, you've got challenges of transitive trust and trust dilution, comparing two trust frameworks that might have different scopes. We have also that nasty problem of liability, and how do you take users that you sign agreements with and then obligate them to another federation? So there's a lot of challenges with this inter-federation trust. Well, maybe we should just leave it up to the identity providers and the relying parties to work it out themselves. We have that N by N. We're not really doing anything much better. So this is a problem that really brought us to this forum. We've been working with the law enforcement community for almost 2 decades, trying to share information securely across federal, state, local boundaries. In our communities, about a million people in the community across all of government and the stakeholders they need to share with, tens of thousands of agencies. They're highly distributed. There's some agencies that are very, very large that have a lot of wherewithal. And then there's some small ones that don't have a lot of funding and don't have a lot of wherewithal. Probably sounds like a lot of the communities that you represent as well. They have a real legitimate need to share information. They have different kinds of information, and they have to adhere to those particular rules that are associated with that type of information. They're not centrally funded, so it's very hard to just mandate something. You've got to do it by value proposition. And one of the key things, and the most challenging, is that law enforcement has a need to talk with almost every other community of interest out there. You can't draw a dotted line and say, well, you don't have to talk to the health people, or you don't have to talk to industry. They got to talk to almost everybody, and they got to follow that lead for that investigation. And very often they don't know who they need to talk to until something bad happens, and then they don't have time to get provisions into that system. So after 9/11, we realized that one of the shortfalls for sharing information was that this identity and access management across all the disparate agencies and law enforcement. I happened to be working in the Global Security Working Group, which was part of the Global Information Sharing Initiative, which is a federal advisory committee to the Department of Justice, the Attorney General. And at that time, that group was saying, well, we'll just give everyone one ID. And state and locals, they said, well, we don't want another thing. We want to use our credential that worked with our systems locally in your system. We want to reuse that. So through a series of meetings and vettings, a series of federated identity standards, a trust framework evolved called GFIPM, Global Federated Identity and Privilege Management. A lot of technical normative specs based on industry specifications, metadata, governance structures, and guidance, and so forth. So what happened, a number of little GFIPM federations started to emerge, some with only 2 or 3 stakeholders in there that were non-interoperable and non-trusting of each other. And we said, that's not the vision, that's not what we want to happen. So a group of larger, more proactive stakeholders got in there, and we started the National Identity Exchange Federation. It's a center here at Georgia Tech. Entities like Homeland Security and the FBI and large departments of public safety grew that on out. But we still had to talk to other communities of interest, and trying to get everybody into one umbrella and one fold is a heavy lift. It's a hard challenge. Just to give you an idea of some of our stakeholders today, we have at the federal level, like HISN, the Homeland Security Information Network, at the county levels, like Los Angeles County for criminal history handling and the sheriff's departments there, entities like the Department of Public Safety in Texas, task force at the local level that span multiple states, Tennessee Meth Task Force, and regional systems like the RISK projects, 250,000 state and local intel analysts type, typically from have-not type agencies. All of these are members of the National Identity Exchange Federation, pronounced NEIF, so NEIF, and they're members of our group today. So the problem we had is, okay, we can build out NEIF, and if we build this out, how do we get that connectivity to these other communities of interest? I mean, we need to do something bigger than NEIF, something bigger than, in fact, we need an identity ecosystem. We're just a couple nights of NEIF out there still with our shrubbery addiction, trying to figure out how we can get past that. So we need some, so all of a sudden I see Matt Moyer. He's our lead engineer. He's there. He's got his eyes closed. He's clicking his heels together. He's saying, there's no place like an identity ecosystem. There's no place like, next thing I know, poof, all of a sudden we're in a big room, a sea of people in there. We were in the land of IDESG. We start talking to people. we find out there's all different variety of perspectives there. There's people from all different communities of interest. I said, this is the right place. We're in the right place. But I said, how are you going to work with all these people? Lots of different perspectives. Everyone's coming here for a different reason. We start talking to other people. Some of them look more like 800-pound gorillas. Some people telling us, hey, we've got 100 million users in our IDP system. We're feeling like round-off error. How are we going to fit in here, and how are we going to work with everybody else? We look over in the corner of the room, big room, and there's a bunch of people huddled in the corner there. And these people got scars, and they're bruised, and they're beat up. I asked Bob Blakely, what are those people in the corner? And Bob says, those are the early adopters and the first-round pilot people. Now, Bob didn't really say that, but that's something that Bob would say. So we knew that we were in the right place. That this was the place that if we were going to solve this silo problem, multiple silos, and we were ever going to come up with a way of crossing these silos and coming up with a framework that we had a hope of solving our problem and actually the larger problem, we had to do it in a forum like this. So this led us to the idea of, let's look at frameworks. And this is the foundation of our proposal. What if trust frameworks were more modular, much like we did with the NEAM program, National Information Exchange Model? We would then have greater transparency. We could standardize on these components. We'd get more ease of composability and reuse across these trust frameworks. The incremental cost of an identity provider joining multiple communities of interest would be lower because they would just have to get one more incremental component perhaps instead of joining another whole trust framework. Hey, why don't we call these components trust marks? Sound like a good thing to call them at the time. Let's give those trust marks some substance. We could build trust marks for lots of different things. We could build them for technical aspects and the privacy and the security and the business needs. We can even build trust marks that represent various different aspects of the legal arrangement with certain policies. So instead of looking at the monolithic trust frameworks, what if we look at those as a series of trust marks? What if these trust frameworks built things called TIPs, trust interoperability profiles, that define the various different components that they need that then could be more visible, more granular and reusable across multiple trust frameworks. Each of the stakeholders within those trust frameworks could then acquire or be represented by that family of trust marks that represent the trust within that. In fact, we can have trust mark providers provide those trust marks across trust frameworks, create an ecosystem or a marketplace where some trust mark providers specialize in one particular type of trust mark. They're very good at doing privacy assessments. They're very good at doing security audits. They're very good at doing on-the-wire interoperability testing. And that those trust marks could be reused across the various different stakeholders in the ecosystem. To think about it from the perspective of an identity provider, a relying party, or the attribute provider, rather than just from the perspective of the federation or the trust mark provider. It's a different way of thinking, but if we could do that, we could maybe solve this problem. Maybe we could provide them registries where these trust marks could be stored, and the stakeholders in the ecosystem could then search and discover the other trust, interoperability, and security needs of the other stakeholders and discover each other and be able to bridge this cross trust work frame problem that we have. And let's call this a trust mark marketplace. So that's the basis of the idea of what we're trying to bring forward. The next natural question is, so what are the right trust marks and where do they come from? So part of our work was to look at the good work that's been done before. Maybe not even invent new things, but maybe look at what's out there a different way. Refactoring out common components across trust frameworks so that they could be reusable. And that's one of the things that we started doing. I know we're 90, 100 days into this. We started looking at a lot of the trust frameworks out there, particularly the ones that are going to be required for our pilot within the National Identity Exchange Federation. And we put them through a very, very scientific process called the red funnel process. You start bringing those, you tearing those out, you look at the normative language and the various different specifications. And what we've done in this initial analysis, we've identified about 122 very, very discrete trust marks. Okay? Now, 122, you can sit there and say, holy mackerel, that's scary, that's a lot of things, that's going to be complicated. But if you build those in a way, I'll tell you one thing, none of these are new requirements. We're already doing these. We're just looking at them in a different way. We're exposing them so they're transparent. If you make it so that they're composable, you can aggregate these trust marks into coarser-grained trust marks as well. You know, you look at the Webster's Dictionary, there's a lot of words in there. very, very complex. I don't use all those words every time I write a message. But when I want to use a word, I'm glad someone's defined it so I don't have to reinvent something. So that's kind of the concept right here. If you look at the categories, we got 8 different categories we sorted these into. If you come to our birds of a feather today, we'll talk more in detail about what those trust marks are and show you some examples of those. Particularly for a pilot, the work that we're going to do is going to fall into 6 different buckets. One we call concept maturation and outreach. This is part of the outreach. But the concept maturation, if you go to our website, you'll start to see the whole concept out there. We actually develop a trust mark framework, and we're talking about doing some of the deep engineering to write the normative technical specifications that are required for a framework to exist and to thrive and to build the standards. The same people that I had on my team to write the normative specifications for the National Information Exchange model are going to be writing these normative specifications as well. So we've got a track record there. We're going to be building some sample trust mark definitions, a lot of them. Okay, we want to seed the marketplace with these. We're going to be building ones that come out of FICAM and some of the standards that we've built. We're going to invite others to comment on those and participate and work with us on building some of those as well. Across all different things, technical standards, privacy standards, and so forth, these trust mark definitions. We're going to build some tools because you're going to say, well, hey, these trust marks, they don't work with my tools today. We're going to build tools that allow you to go through assessment processes for trust mark providers to take these trust marks and publish those in registries to discover those, and then in addition to be able to take those trust marks and convert those into simultaneous metadata trust fabric such that it can be ingested in commercial products today. We're going to then take this, we're going to pilot this in the National Identity Exchange Federation with our members. We're going to actually retroactively issue them an equivalent set of trust marks to the monolithic onboarding that they've already done, so that we'll be more transparent and visible external to the federation that we have. And then we're going to work with our NASIO friends and try to evolve outside of that community of interest and look for, along the fringe, some test cases that we can pilot this trust mark concept and grow that out. Here's our timeline. We're at the red line. We have a very aggressive schedule. We've already got quite a bit of product. If you've looked at our website, we're going to continue to post product out there. I think we've already built 12 draft trust mark definitions that will soon be published on that site as well. We invite you and encourage you to review our work here. 3 asks that we have. We'd like the group to look at our trust mark framework, provide comments on that. We'd like you to look at the trust mark definitions to see if they would be useful for you. If not, give us feedback. There's ways of giving it through the website, and we'll participate in this forum as well. And then once we write these trust marks, we're going to turn these over to the appropriate standards development organizations or entities to care and feed for those in the long term. So what we're doing is try to seed the marketplace and solve this problem. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Jeremy and everybody for the identity ecosystem. I think this is a good place to solve these kind of problems.